In this video, we're going to talk about some of the most obscure FNAF characters from the entire franchise. I've already done 2 videos talking about some largely forgotten FNAF characters, but today, we're going deep, and digging up some of the most bottom-of-the-barrel FNAF characters you can think of. Like with my last video about forgotten animatronics, I went to my community tab to ask you guys which characters from the entire FNAF series you think are the absolute most obscure, and y'all did not disappoint. I got a ton of great answers, and now here we are. Before we get into it, I will say one thing. I'm not going to be talking about any of the book characters. I've only read the Silver Eyes trilogy and none of the Fazbear Frights books. In the future, I'll probably do a video specifically for the book characters, but for now, we're just sticking to game characters, for the most part. Make sure to leave some obscure FNAF characters down in the comments, and if there's enough good ones, I might do a part 2. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, what would you even classify as an obscure character? I had a couple people bring up Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie, but they are extremely popular Easter egg characters. Most people do know about them, even if they did go kind of underutilized in the grand scheme of the series. I would never ever consider them obscure, however. For the truly obscure characters, we have to dig deep. Let's start with a pretty simple one. In the first ever FNAF World trailer, there's some early footage of the battle scenes. One of the most prominently shown enemies in this trailer is a robot Freddy looking dude. This character is known as Evil Endo, and even though they are a prominent character within the game's very own trailer, they never actually appear in the final game at all. When the troll game FNAF World Halloween Edition came out a couple days prior, which trust me, we'll get back to that later, one of the enemies included was called Prototype, which people started to notice looked kind of similar to Evil Endo. The similarities were minor, but there wasn't that much to go off of at the time. Well, the speculation around Evil Endo and Prototype would finally make a whole lot more sense once the game finally came out. As stated previously, Evil Endo didn't make the cut for the final game. However, an edited version of the same model was included in the game. The enemy in question? Prototype. The Prototype from FNAF World Halloween Edition and Evil Endo from the first trailer were pretty much combined to create the final version you can see in FNAF World today. Let's bring FNAF World Halloween Edition back into the frame. This troll game is full of obscure characters, some of which ended up making the final cut for FNAF World, and others that were left to rot in Halloween Edition forever. This game has 19 different enemies and bosses to defeat, so let's start with the ones that made it into the actual game, and then we'll move on to the real obscure characters. Tangle is a recolor of Mangle, and has a slightly different color palette in this game, which will be the case for most of the characters that return. A much darker green is used, and the typical base white color is swapped out for a gray one, making this Tangle look much more like a robot. Security is completely different to its final appearance. You may not even recognize this character, but this is the original version of the Security Owl boss from FNAF World. I love this design so much, and I would have killed to see this properly modeled in the final game. The owl is also a great design, but something about this original one makes me like it just a bit more. Maybe it's the camera head. Those typically look sick on characters. Ball Boy and Brow Boy are pretty much the same compared to their final appearances, but their sprites do look pretty goofy. Mad Endo looks kinda different, but it's pretty much the same idea. A big, angry looking endoskeleton. Red Bear and Prototype share the same sprite in game, but they have much different appearances in the final one. Finally, we have Purple Geist. They were made to be the final boss of this troll game, however they were added later into FNAF World Update 2 as part of the true final boss fight. They get a new sprite, but the design is pretty much identical since it's not a 3D model. Okay, now we're moving on to the super obscure stuff. Cheesehead and Anchovy are pizzas with faces. Same goes with Half Bacon Mud Pie, but swap pizza for cake. Mad Jack and Big Jack are Jack-in-the-Box enemies, and they look pretty good. I kinda wish they made it into the final game. I have a feeling they would have looked great as models. Here's a super sick one, Quad Endo. He kinda looks like Mendo with the bluish, purplish coloring and the yellow dot on his chest. This one would have been fire in the actual FNAF world, but that game already features quite a few endoskeletons, so it was probably best to leave them out for the sake of variety. Zangle is a demonic dragon-looking version of Mangle that breathes fire. If FNAF World is more fantasy RPG, I could see this working, but this is still one of the coolest sprites from this game. Mini P is just a small version of Purple Guy, but he looks high on some of that good shit. And finally, we have Party Hat A and Party Hat B, which you could argue are the most obscure characters from this game, as they're both secret bosses, meaning that out of the small pool of people who even played this game, very few would have even seen these guys. That wraps up Halloween Edition, but yeah, this game is an absolute treasure trove of obscure FNAF stuff. Believe it or not, there's even more FNAF World stuff I have to talk about in this video, but I'll give you all a break for now and we'll move on to some regular FNAF characters. In FNAF 1, 2, and 3, if you play the games on Halloween, some spooky lights will be added to your office. On top of that, a little jack-o'-lantern will be added to the office as well. If we can consider the cupcake a character, I think this little dude is fair game. The FNAF 1 pumpkin is alright. Looks a little too green or something though. Almost like a watermelon? I don't know, it looks off. FNAF 2 has the best pumpkin by a mile. It's super cartoony looking, but that makes it feel even more like an actual animatronic of some kind. I know it isn't, but you know what I mean. It fits into the environment of the office really well, and looks super cute. The FNAF 3 pumpkin is also really good, but for completely different reasons. It fits in the office really well, and the way it's added makes it look like it was always meant to be there or something. The jack-o'-lantern kind of returned in FNAF 4 Halloween Edition in place of Chica's cupcake, so I guess they are a real character all along. Who would have guessed? You know what? I'm not afraid to say it. Mr. Pumpkin is better than the cupcake, fight me. This one barely counts, I just thought it was funny, so I decided to include it. When Funko was first showing off their mystery mini FNAF figures, which by the way, why do people even like these? These are so ugly, it's not even funny, like what? Anyway, when they first showed them off to the public, for some reason the Springtrap toy was colored orange. There's really only a couple pictures of this thing, and as far as I can tell, no collector has ever been able to get their hands on this probably one-of-a-kind Springtrap toy. How does this even happen? I get maybe if it was like an early prototype, but this is the display toy you are showing to the public at what I assume is a toy fair. Whatever. Funko's mix-up just made for a really interesting and weird story to tell people. Like you can go up to your friends and go, "Hey man, have you ever heard of Orange Springtrap?" That'll get a kick out of them, probably. While we're already talking about Springtrap, Dark Springtrap is another pretty obscure FNAF character. Dark Springtrap is the version of Springtrap we see at the very end of Sister Location Custom Night. However, after that we never saw this iteration of the character again, as I assume Scott decided to replace them with Scrap Trap. Great choice there, dude. Really good call. They're engulfed in shadows, so it's pretty hard to make out any major differences between Dark and normal Springtrap, but the most prominent difference is the large chunks of their body that are just straight up missing now. I think the weirdest part about all of this is that for some reason, Dark Springtrap got a lot of merch. I have no idea why, other than it was an easy recolor and an excuse to sell more versions of an existing figure mold, which is something Funko does a lot, to be fair. This would have been cool if they tried to make it look anything like Dark Springtrap from the games, but they took the lazy way out. I would be way more critical of this decision if Dark Springtrap had like more than one appearance in the games, but he doesn't, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, I think that was enough of a FNAF World break. But I swear, this is the last FNAF World character for now. This is actually one of the most bizarre cases of an obscure character I have ever seen. So let's just get into it. If you have ever played FNAF World, you probably recognize this boss called Mad Endo. They're a large, bulky endoskeleton with bright red eyes, which is a pretty sick boss design. However, thanks to this comment right here, I am now aware that this guy has a twin. No, not the golden version, which is probably what you just thought of. There is another boss fight in FNAF World that uses the exact same model as Mad Endo, called Overclock. The battle itself is just a harder version of Mad Endo's fight, but the really weird shit comes in the form of the rest of the comment. Crimson Destroyer here states that Overclock has a slightly more angry expression compared to Mad Endo, and that he has different animations. The FNAF World Wiki also states these facts, but dude, I don't know if I can even tell a single difference between these two. I don't know what they're talking about when it comes to the face being slightly angrier. As far as I can tell, they're identical. When it comes to the animation, it might be a bit faster on Overclock, but that could literally just be my brain tricking me into thinking that there's differences because I'm actively looking for them. This even being a thing in FNAF World is so confusing to me. Like, would it really have been that hard to just hue shift Overclock to be a different color or something? Like, why are there two bosses with the exact same sprites but different names? I even downloaded the FNAF World textures from online to make sure there weren't two different versions of the same boss sprite, and lo and behold, there's only one set of sprites that both Overclock and Mad Endo share. Myth busted. Better update your old ass wiki that probably hasn't been touched in 5 years, guys. The gig is up. If I'm wrong and there truly are any differences between these two bosses when it comes to their sprites or animations, please let me know. But as far as I can tell, they are identical. Now if you want my opinion, Overclock should have been slightly tinted red, so it looked like it was heating up or something. That's a simple enough edit that would have separated these two characters in some way, but as it stands now, Overclock will forever be the obscure brother to Mad Endo. I think the absolute most obscure character I got suggested for this video is Bonnie Cookie. When I first read the name, my mind jumped right away to FNAF AR, since I know that game has a ton of weird skins and that kinda just sounds like one of them. But thanks to our good friend the Ultra Custom Night Wiki, I was instead greeted with a white silhouette version of FNAF 1 Bonnie. Apparently, Cookie Bonnie is an unused texture that was dug up from the files of FNAF VR. My guess is that this was made for development purposes, and it was just left in the game files for no particular reason. Still, this is a pretty obscure pick. Not sure I could even call this a character, but I thought it was so weird that I had to include it. Leave it to Ultra Custom Night to include even the most obscure characters from this franchise. Hopefully you learned at least one new thing from this video. If not, damn, you gotta tell me some even more obscure characters to include next time. I've been yeah, and have a good day, everybody.
FNAF number 7 is that the cupcake has somewhat of an unofficial name dubbed by the fan community, and his name is Carl.